Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for this session on improving your critical thinking skills. I'm Jodi Hammer, Career Services Specialist with the National Peace Corps Association's Global Reentry Program, and I'm thrilled to be here with you to talk about this very important concept and how you can actually improve your critical thinking skills to be able to excel in your personal and your professional life. So thank you for joining me first and foremost. I want to make sure that this is as interactive of a session as possible. So please feel free to put any of your questions, for those who are listening to this live, of course, into the chat box, and I'll be more than happy to address those questions as we get started. So I asked the audience before we started with the live the live presentation, the recording, to tell me what they were looking for in today's session, just to make sure that we're on target. And Doris shared that she wants to hear what I have to say on the topic. And she agrees that critical thinking is very important. Excellent, Doris. I'll be looking for your input as we go through as well then. Thank you so much for that in advance. We also have Kathleen, who's asking about, she wants to get out of today's session the following things. So defining critical thinking skills, how to improve them, how to demonstrate that you've mastered them in a job search. Oh, those are all such great concepts. And by the way, that goes very much with what I've planned for today. So I'm thrilled to hear that that's what you're looking for. That's definitely the approach that I'm taking here today. I'm looking not only at the importance of critical thinking in the professional sense, right? Like in a job, to move up in jobs and things like that, and the job search, but also in your personal life. So we'll be talking a lot about that. So great. Okay. And I think we've gotten those. So let's go ahead and ask. Let's move ahead. I have one more question to ask you. And that is, what is critical learning, critical thinking? What is critical thinking? How do you define it? If you can just put your answer in the chat box, that's fine. And if you're comfortable, you can certainly unmute yourself and just share that. I'm open to that as well. What is critical thinking? Do we have anyone who's brave enough? You all are on mute. You should have been. Let me just give you the ability to be able to take yourselves off mute. We usually don't do that. Yeah, you're on mute, but you should be able to. Are people trying to unmute and they're not able to? Is that what's happening? Michael, can you try to say something, please?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. What would you like to say? Are you willing to share your own thoughts?
Well, from my, point of view, it's being able to analyze in a more, global way, how you think through problem solving, not in a linear fashion, but a more holistic approach. That's what I think.
Absolutely. Thinking through your approach and as you're, what's impacting you, right? As you're thinking about this and how do you assess maybe something that you read in a critical way, right? Where you're using critical thinking skills, where you're just not believing everything to believe it. You're going through kind of a process, right? Absolutely. Exactly. And it's a very holistic process. I absolutely agree. And as I was saying already, it's very much of a, it affects all parts of your life, right? It can be beneficial, I should say, to all parts of your life if you have strong critical thinking skills. Thank you so much. Kirsty shares being able to determine fact from fiction and to think in an unbiased way. That is excellent too, Kirsty. That's very important, right? You're not everything you read is true. And boy, we've learned that in recent years, haven't we? Well, it was on the internet. Of course it's true. Well, no. So much of what we see and hear these days are, falsities. And yet people do just believe it because it was said, or because it was said by a certain person that they, trust, instead of putting in that effort of, okay, thinking critically through this. What was said? Why was it said? And we'll go through a lot of kind of, steps as you, go through critical thinking and what's involved. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Let's see. So good. Those are great things. Let me go ahead and share for you here. I'm going to share the definition. There's so many definitions, so I hate to say this is the definition. And I've put several different concepts down here as well, right? But defining critical thinking, it really comes down to, right, the practice of collecting, analyzing, and carefully evaluating information so that you can form a more informed decision, right? You can approach a problem or an issue from a more, I don't want to say educated perspective, but a more informed perspective, right? You're looking at and collecting information, and not just falling into some of those pits of just believing whatever you hear, right? So I like that as a definition, but there's also some interesting concepts that I thought I would share here as well. I mean, another way to maybe look at it: reasonable, reflective thinking that's focused on deciding what to believe or do. So it's really aligned with problem solving, right? Because if you're doing critical thinking, if you're practicing critical thinking, it's going to help you make a better, solve the problem quicker or more, or I shouldn't always say quicker, because the quickest way might be the incorrect way of just believing what's there and not, questioning or doing the critical thinking. But you'd arrive at a better informed decision and a better, solution for, these problems. So absolutely. And analyze. One of you mentioned, analyzing as well. Exactly. So it involves, clear and rational thought, right? So it's logic. And that's something that's so important and so often not used enough, I would say. So I definitely think there's there's a lot more room for that, if you will. So we'll think about that as we go through as well. Also, again, analyzing facts in order to form a judgment, right? Fact versus untruth, right? Fact versus fiction, really, but looking at facts or things that are presented as facts and making that decision, doing some of the research and the analyzing to see if it really is something that's true. And this last definition, I really liked. It's so simple, right? It's thinking about thinking, right? Which you might think, well, what does that really mean, right? Thinking about the thinking process, right? And how you get to whatever thought it is. I mean, I like that. It's simple, yet I think pretty profound when you really think about it, right? And not just doing the gut decision, based on what you think, or you might, other people are thinking, kind of peer pressure type of things, that kind of stuff too. So absolutely. So why is critical thinking important? What do you think first? You can put this in the chat box, or you should now be able to unmute yourselves. I think you're all by default muted in the beginning, but I think you do have the ability to unmute, as Michael did. So if you want to unmute and say it, or you can certainly put it in the chat box. And again, the question is, why is critical thinking important? Great. We've got some good stuff coming in here. That's great. So being able to determine fact from fiction and to think in an unbiased way, that might have been also, part of the definition, right? But it's important because you obviously want to be able to think in an unbiased way. And that's what you do through critical thinking. Helping avoid the influence of biases. I mean, that's huge, as we're seeing in our world, right? There's so many, what do they call them? Goodness, I'm blanking. There's thought leaders, right? And you have, some that you might really respect, because you think that they are very unbiased and you really follow their blog or their podcast or whatever, because you feel you get an unbiased perspective, right? Or there might be others who are people follow and they're following them, they're thought leaders, but maybe not in the way that is as helpful. They might be steering people and not really doing critical thinking, speaking from stereotypes or all kinds of different things, racial, all kinds of, horrific ways of kind of spreading the word on some really tragic and awful kinds of topics and just issues, I should say. Anticipating obstacles and problems. Yes, Kathleen, that is critical thinking is huge in that, right? So if you're thinking ahead and you're doing critical thinking, part of that is looking at the obstacles. You're looking at the pros and the cons, or the why might they say this, why might they not, what, looking for kind of, what is behind maybe what somebody says or the problem that you're trying to solve, right? And go from there, the obstacles and the problems, so that you can better encounter that, better, get around them or get over the issues and move on, right? Great. Ability to make correct decisions. Michael is saying critical thinking is important for correct decisions, right? If you're not thinking critically and you're just jumping on whatever the bandwagon is, or, you're not really thinking through, that can cause issues. Absolutely. So good. There's some good things that came out here. Let's see. And Jennifer, hi, Jennifer, allows us to consider making informed decisions in new scenarios, or in a new or as new information emerges on a familiar topic. Absolutely. That is a great one. I love that, the making informed decisions. And you're spot on with, things change, right? So a familiar topic, you might be really well versed on it, and boy, it can change overnight. It can change very quickly based on a lot of different things. So you need to then reevaluate, right? And reanalyze and do those steps that we're going to talk about, to make sure that you are still, it still makes sense, right? So wonderful. Thank you so much. Those are great, great decisions. And there's so many things. So I have a few things that are here on, why it's important, right? One, it makes you more desirable to employers, right? That's a huge one. And part of that, there are World Economic Forum, a survey showed critical thinking was considered to be the #2 skill set that employers are looking for. That's how huge it is. So when you prepare for interviews, right, and you prepare for, doing, the application process and going in and doing your interview, you want to make sure that you are able to communicate, your effectively and show your critical thinking skills. And they'll get at those in a lot of ways, right? Employers will ask certain types of questions where it might be a scenario that you need to then think through. What would the steps be in your mind, and what action would you take if you were leading a group in this, or whatever, leading a team or participating in a team? How would you solve this problem? By asking you that, they're going to be able to get from you whether or not you are a critical thinker, whether or not you approach a problem from the critical thinking perspective and look at it in terms of analyzing it and getting through that. And we'll go through those steps in a little bit here, but absolutely. So that's huge, right? It also, though, it helps you to succeed in your job once you have the job, right? So interviewing, getting the job, right? Showing your critical thinking skills and being able to prove them, for example, and, talk about them, right? And then also in moving up, because in most industries, what your job comes down to is you are working to solve problems, right? Or make advance in a certain way in terms of, advance, a product or a material or whatever. It's very much related to critical thinking, and they want people who can think through the process using critical thinking skills to get to an answer that's much more informed. And it's huge. So in the professional world, it's very important, right? But let's talk about as well the interpersonal, interactions, your relations, your personal and professional relations, right? How can critical thinking skills impact that? Anyone want to share a little bit about what you think in your personal life? if you have strong critical thinking skills, how can it positively impact your personal life? I'm going to share a few things as well. Let's see here in the chat. And again, please feel free to test the mute and unmute yourself and share it if you're comfortable doing it that way. I will share a little bit on this while people are maybe compiling their thoughts and putting them in the chat box to add to it. But one of the things, for example, if you are a strong critical thinker, it means you're not you don't waver you're not as biased, right? I mean, we all come from certain biases, right? Fundamentally, but then there's that quest to consider both of the angles, both of the aspects before you make a decision or before you just jump on a bandwagon to support or not, a cause, things like that. So if you are an excellent critical thinker in your relations, it's going to help you to interact better with people, because people tend to gravitate toward those who have good interpersonal skills, and critical thinking skills is a part of the interpersonal skills, right? You can actually have people can have more trust in you oftentimes, right? They see you as somebody who is a model, a role model on how to approach issues or problems. You might have more people who confide in you about those kinds of, whatever issues and such, because they respect you. So it garners respect and an openness, like people feel more comfortable around you and being around you, and trust, which obviously can impact many aspects of our personal life. I mean, you think about even people who want to spend time with you. If you come with good critical thinking skills and interpersonal skills, you're going to bond with people more, which increases the likelihood of you spending time forming new relationships, right? Friendships, even finding, a life partner, right? If you're skilled in interpersonal skills and your kind of critical thinking can help in this, that can help you a long way as well, just in all aspects of your life. So let's see if there's anything that was put in. Michael, thank you. Critical thinking helps to develop empathy toward others and more fully understand people. Yes, that empathy is huge. And I know that RPCVs in general have a pretty high empathy level, it seems, right? Partly because of our experience, being, put into, a country, totally foreign to us, and really immersing ourselves and working for, whatever time period you were able to be there, working with the community to affect change, and to just be, you become part of that community, and they really do trust you and such. That's great. So I think a lot of people have a head start on that, and working on your critical thinking skills can help you even more with that. Let's see, we have another let's see, lets you work out disagreements or differences in opinions. Yes, Kirsty, in a calm, rational manner. And that's so key, right? Because the truth of the matter is, you're not going to agree with everything if you have any friendship, right? Chances are you're probably not going to agree on every single thing. Fairly rare that you would agree on everything, right? Same in families, right? I come from a family, and we have drastically different outlooks, political inclinations and things like that, and yet that approaching relationships also with critical thinking and that aspect, and being calm, like Kirsty says, and in a rational manner, is going to go so much further than when people get defensive and, oh, you're just saying this because you're blah 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 blah, fill in the blank, right? So that's a really good one. Thank you so much, Kirsty. That's awesome. So all right, so there's lots. In other words, there's lots of reasons why critical thinking is important. And I think you probably feel it's important, otherwise you wouldn't be here today. So thank you again for joining me and going down this path here. So I want to look at some of the core critical thinking skills. There's so many that are involved. And this is a graphic that I found online that I really liked, talking about kind of what goes into critical thinking, right? So you're analyzing what the analysis, the things that are kind of around the circle here, the ball, right? Analysis, interference, explanation, evaluation, self-regulation, and interpretation, right? So all of those things are really important, right? So you've got to the analysis right away. First, you're asking questions, why do you think that, right? So it's examining, what are the ideas or the thoughts, and what are, claims and arguments, reasons, kind of getting a perspective on why someone might think this, or why this situation might exist, right? What's leading to it. So also, what does it mean, right? So kind of, why is this important? What does it, what's the impact? What's the, interpreting, okay, what is the impact of this? Why is this one, something, do we need to, looking at, maybe clarifying, like how, what's said, right? How good is our evidence? That is a big one, right? That's with the category that's called self-regulation, right? So it's trusting, your own evidence, and being unbiased, trying to be as unbiased as possible, and looking at different perspectives, but also, monitoring yourself, like it says there, right? And when you're, like, be willing to admit, and re-enter maybe, and self-correct, like it says here, right? All of those things are super important. But then looking too at, like, the evidence, 'cause it's all about, right, evidence, logic, all the kind of, what is a part of the problem? How is it defined? And what's the evidence in favor of, against, those kinds of things, right? So looking at the different perspectives, drawing conclusions, making more of a, okay, from the evidence that's here based on XYZ, and analyzing it, you might come out with a conclusion. You probably would, right? And then how did you come, how did you come to what you're believing there, right? So the results, sharing, right, justifying, all of this is in the process. When you're doing critical thinking and you're on a team, for example, or you're doing an individual project, and you're approaching it from that critical thinking, all of these are things that you keep in mind. And stating, your findings in the end, what what the results are, what you found, presenting the arguments, what makes sense based on a thorough review of, right, pros and cons, and all these other things, right? And then, of course, one of the things that I didn't say earlier, but the evaluation, right? Do you have your facts right? So it's your sources, and what's the credibility? We did talk a little more before this slide. What's the credibility of the source, and all of that. So absolutely. All right. So if there's any questions that have come up, please just jot them into the chat box. Otherwise, we'll just keep going ahead here. We're going to talk briefly about the kinds of questions that a critical thinker asks, right? I like this graphic on the left, and it's very simple. And I think, critical thinking is something that, it's really promoted in schools down to grade school, right? Critical thinking is something that I think our current education system is supposedly trying to, right? It's what they're trying to focus on oftentimes, and want to focus on, because they understand that the critical learner is going to go much further, is going to be more successful in life, is going to be able to handle problems in a calm, rational way, rather than, flying off the handle or whatever. So looking at, when you're looking at what's happening, right? Why it's important, this little infographic here, I love that, right? What don't I see? So is there anything maybe missing that you have to investigate and look a little closer to maybe find? Yeah. How do I know? How do I know this? What's right? What's the reason why what facts, what information led me to make this, right? Who's saying it, right? What's the position, who they are, where they're coming from, what their bias is, right? And then anything else, what else? Looking beyond that as well, right? So opening, it's that opening the alternatives, right? And thinking outside the box. Because sometimes we get really scripted in and kind of there's one right way and wrong way, and there's just this or this, and this is the only alternatives, when the reality is maybe there's another alternative out here that we could work on, and that would be maybe a happy medium between, or solve the issue without the difficulties that the other two options had, right? So you always want to be open to that as well. Absolutely. So when you're talking about improving your critical thinking skills, you're really talking about defining your questions, right? Your goals, keeping your goals in mind, right? So it's what's the question or the problem or the issue, right? And how are we going to look at getting there, right? And then you gather the reputable, reliable, I should say, information, right, from reliable sources, and looking at different kinds of information and being very aware of biases which exist all over, right? But asking the right kinds of questions, right? Kind of like the questions that are on the left here with the critical thinker, what kinds of questions they ask, right? So considering, there's so many questions, but that's the big thing with critical thinking. It's you're a question. You're going to question things. You're going to ask. You're not going to just say, oh, okay, this is what it is. Oh, okay, and take it. You're going to be looking at like why and who's saying it, why, and just all of those, thinking critically, right? And then exploring all sides, like we said, thinking outside the box. That's the real key. I love this graphic that I got from the Global Digital Citizen Foundation. It's really breaks down critical thinking into, it's like a cheat sheet. And I think you can see what the questions are here. I was a little worried, but I think you can actually read it pretty well here. I won't go through all of it, but I think it's a cheat sheet of these kinds of questions, right? What are the kinds of questions that you could ask to be a critical thinker and to improve your critical thinking skills, and to incorporate that style into your own manner, your own procedures, right? So the who, questions like, who benefits from this, right? Who makes decisions about this? Who's most directly affected? Who have you also heard discuss this? Like all these great questions, right? And then going on to the what. So it's really comes down to the 5, right? The who, what, where, when, why, and how. 6 with how. The 5 W's and how. So yeah, these are great questions, right? The what are the strengths and weaknesses of this solution or this alternative? What are the strengths and weaknesses of the other ones? And a lot of this talks about a SWOT analysis, and I may have a slide later that's on the SWOT analysis. I'm sure that many of you, several of you maybe that did Peace Corps, have probably done a SWOT analysis. Does anyone care to venture and describe what SWOT stands for? SWOT. What does it stand for? Anyone?
Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Thank you so much. That's exactly right. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That's a great way, in like a little 4 square with the SWOT analysis, of doing, the strengths. What's the strengths of this option? What's the weaknesses of this option, or this whatever you're trying to solve? What are the opportunities? That thinking outside the box. What are the opportunities that this may bring if we can, forge through this? And the threats. What are the how do I want to define threats? Threats as what are the things that could endanger this maybe, or what are the things that maybe could be things that are outside your control, right? Maybe the market crashing, or, the threats, COVID, if you're, that obviously is a threat that very much affected all of our Peace Corps volunteers in the field, for example. So yeah, your SWOT analysis can be really good, can be really helpful. The looking at the what, right? What we already said, what are the strengths and weaknesses, right? What's another alternative? Like trying to get at other thoughts, not just the one, right? What would be a counter argument? So it really has to do with kind of that empathy we talked about, right? You're more empathetic when you're a critical thinker. It's because you're able to put yourself into the situation that somebody else is in and feel what they might be feeling, right? You can, that's a huge one, right? That's just, that's a great one. And so it's always good looking at, the counter, argument and why they might be, or, being able to be empathetic. What's the best and worst case scenario? Like thinking through, right? And ways to, what's getting in the way of our action. That's a really good one when you're, on a team and you're trying to like find a solution and there's things that are slowing you down, right? What is getting in the way? Is it some kind of system that's set up that needs approval here and here and here for every step, that maybe could be revised or somehow adapted, or at least, something, right? I mean, there's just lots of things that come up. In terms of the where, the kinds of questions, right? Where would we see this in the real world? So it's looking for concrete examples in the real world, right? A couple other ones that I like from this one. Where is there the most need for this, right? Where is it most applicable? Where could this be utilized most, right? Where can we get more information? That's a huge one and a very important one, right? And help. Where do we get more help for this? Absolutely. So there's definitely lots of things with the where, right? When, is it acceptable? Is this acceptable, right? So when, and when you're going to be doing, when is this acceptable really is the question, not is. You have to put the when, when would this, benefit or cause a problem in our society, right? Lots of different things. When's the best time to take action? So many people are like wired in that we got to go, solve the problem, implement it immediately and go forward. And what happens is sometimes people take kind of, in a sense, it becomes a half-baked idea. Maybe you haven't thought completely through the process and of maybe, with your SWOT analysis or whatever, and you just rush into it. And then you learn after the fact, oh, shoot, we should have waited. There would have been a better time to take action. So thinking all these things through, right? Your whys, things like, why is this a problem? Right? What is the challenge? Why is it a problem? Why are people influenced by this? Right? Why should people know about this? That gets to the importance. Why is it important? Right? Why have we allowed this to happen? That's a big one. And sometimes that's a really hard one, right? Because maybe there's things that have happened that are, in your, whether it's your organization or, whatever. And it's, why have we allowed this to happen? It's come to a head with some kind of huge blow up or some kind of huge, issue. And, it's like, wow, that could have been prevented if we thought of that, earlier, and maybe been more approached it from more of a critical thinking perspective. So great. And then the how, right? How is this similar to whatever else you may have looked at, right? How does it benefit others or us? How do we know this is the truth? That comes back to the research that you're doing and the biases and trying to, find reliable sources, right? How will we approach this safely and effectively, right? Yeah, so all of those. I mean, there's lots of different questions. I just like this. I like the compilation here. I like how it's so nice and bright and colorful. It just, I think is a cheat sheet that you could use. Take a snapshot of it with your, camera on your phone, right? Or a screen on your screen if you're on a laptop or whatever. Or look at it when you check it out online. But I think it's something that would be helpful to come back to for people if you're really serious about wanting to kind of move forward in that. And then, of course, improving your critical thinking skills. There's, these, I like this graphic as well, like 6 tips, right? So kind of, looking at what it is, we've already defined it, right? But this one here, process of analyzing information objectively, separating facts from bias, to create these, reasoned judgments, right? Come at it from an informed position. So there's some things that you need to do to become a better critical thinker. And I'd like to challenge, you all right now, if there's anything else beyond the 5 or 6 we're going to be going through here, please put those. What are your thoughts? How else could we, become better critical thinkers? What are other aspects of that maybe we haven't captured in this? This is certainly not all. There's so much with being, with critical thinking. And there's so much. It's overwhelming, really. It can be. So as you put your thoughts in the chat box, I'd like to go over, accept that you're not always right. And this is a big one, right? Using your mistakes to grow Because here's the thing, we all are going to be wrong at certain parts. And if you don't think you're ever wrong, you probably have a problem, right? So, we all are going to be wrong at certain times and such. And it's part of the human condition, right? But if you're able to graciously, accept your mistakes, maybe admit them and learn and grow from them. That's what people really want to know. And what that reminds me of is in job interviews, for example, many times people are horrified by getting the question, let's say they've been let go, they've been fired from a job. Maybe it's their most recent job and they feel like they're never going to get a job because nobody's going to, I was just fired. They're not going to let, I was let go. They're not going to hire me, whatever. So if you were to get that question, why did you leave your last position? And, you could choose to answer that in a way that, you wouldn't have to say, I was fired. It was awful. My boss was a jerk. You would never do that, right? You never talk bad about a boss anytime. But what you could do is say, I was working in a field or in an organization with, I entered the organization with XYZ and I came to realize it really wasn't the best fit for me. And, and I really, I made whatever you're going to say, mistakes in, whatever it was, it wasn't as good of a fit for me. And I, made, I cost, maybe you say, if it's, I'm thinking like you might have made a marketing decision that cost them, $1 million. It might be like a huge thing, right? Or whatever it is, that I made a decision that was not as informed or I made a decision and my decision directly impacted the company's bottom line because they lost XYZ client or whatever it was, right? Whatever it happened. And that was really difficult for me. And I was consequently let go. And that was very difficult for me. But here's what I've learned from the process. I've learned that it's important to and here's what I'm very committed to doing differently and blah, 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 to prevent ever having to go through that type of an experience, because I have typically been a very high performer and in my past roles. So you could do something like that, where you're talking about being let go, but you're talking about what we learned about it, because really employers understand we are human, right? We make mistakes, some bigger than others, right? But some mistakes are bigger than others, but we learn from them, hopefully. What you don't want to do is keep making the same mistake, right? So it can help you in a lot of ways like that. Great. Doing your research, learning from, learning fact from fiction. We've already, I think, talked about this quite a bit, right? You can, just because it's in print, just because it's, on the web, just because someone says it doesn't mean it's true. Often quite the opposite, many times. So absolutely doing really good research and really, I am a believer of, I believe in Snopes. If you're familiar with Snopes, if you just go to Snopes.com, SNOPES.com, I believe them because I feel like they do a good job of doing both. They'll research both. They'll put what the situation is. This is what's being said. And here's the research for, the research against, and then they'll make an assessment. Is it true or false? Or is it some truths, but not, they're very good. And so I like it because I can very quickly put in whatever it is. Is it true? Did this happen or did this? And I feel like I get a more informed decision. Or a more informed answer that I can then make my most informed decision. So, and I'm sure there are some other sites like that. I don't know if folks have ideas of those. Please feel free to dump those into the chat box. We always love to have those and explore that as well. But, second guess what's said. Don't just trust it from the get-go. And I noticed there's a little bit coming into the chat box. That's great. On other suggestions that you have or other tips to become a better critical thinker. The next one here, collaborating with other critical thinkers. That's awesome. You want to, as much as possible, when you have the option versus being put in a team, because sometimes with grad school, for example, you might have a team project and you're put into it with no feedback or input. You're just put into it and you're working with 3 other people. You have no idea what they're like. But and you can make that work, and you can actually, if that experience is a difficult one, you can actually use that in some ways too, as a good example of your ability to, be resilient and work through things and, whatever the case may be in interviews. So another one here, collaborate with other critical thinkers. We already said yes, exposing yourself to the other ones. That's always great. People who think differently. Don't just follow people who think exactly how you follow, right? get people who, think differently so that you can then better, get a better informed decision. And I've heard in the past, I've actually known somebody who has clerked on the Supreme Court, and there's been justices who will intentionally bring on a clerk, a law clerk. It's a huge job, and it's a huge honor and all of that, but they'll bring somebody from the opposite persuasion because they want to get the what is the thinking from that as well as the other. And so it helps them do critical thinking better. And let's hope that they all do critical thinking when they're making decisions. So they're supposed to, certainly. Let's see, there's a little bit that's coming in here. Oh, why? Okay. Wiki of regional fact checking sites for when we're working internationally. Nice. That's a good link, folks. Folks, you can download the chat box, by the way, before we end, but just as long as before you go, you just click on that little button that has the 3 dots in it and the square around it at the bottom of the chat box. And you can just choose download or save chat or whatever. So awesome. So let's see. There's another comment. Jennifer, thank you. You have such good thoughts. I find that critical thinking and creatively thinking processes work well together. Yes. You know what? That's a really good point. And I don't think we've talked about that as much yet. Creativity, right? It kind of goes with that outside the box, right? Thinking outside the box, approaching problems, issues, things, challenges in a creative way, not just the norm, right? That is absolutely a critical thinking move there. Absolutely. So creative thinking processes help train us to see, to train us exactly, see the connections between unrelated ideas. And then in turn, that helps keep our minds open to using additional sources on considering other points of view. Fabulous. Jennifer, thank you so much. That's a really good one there. I appreciate that. And then let's see here. Somebody says, Kathleen, thank you. Seek out opinions from sources you likely disagree with. Yes, that's very related to what I was saying about just a moment ago. It could be somebody from, a very different, maybe it's a political persuasion or whatever, but somebody that you can kind of hear what they had to say. And, I think people always, I don't say always, tend to, especially like in politics, if it's like us and them, and it's very us and them, right? Oh, you're this, I can't listen to you, or oh, you're that. But there are people who clearly, there are going to be people who are maybe completely maybe telling mistruths or not, whatever, but there's going to be people who are in that persuasion and are very, they're respectable people. They're, I think of some of my, friends from, high school who are in a very different political persuasion, but we can respect each other and, agree to disagree, right, when needed. But I always feel like it's interesting to hear a perspective and instead of just seeing what somebody thinks, right? Kind of why is that, right? So questioning assumptions, like we said, try thinking of alternative methods for, the same task. Like, how else could we get to that goal? Remember in the beginning when I talked about determine your goal and then look at how you're going to get there, right? At the very beginning, it's really like, how else could we there's not just one route. There might be, after you're going to be probably taking things apart and figuring out what makes most sense and arguments and all of that to determine what you feel is the best route, but acknowledging that there are other routes as well. And there may be another route that's outside of what you're first thinking that is the better route for you to take. So not closing yourself off, putting the blinders on that are, so often, associated with like horses when they're, doing, carriage rides. They have those big blinders so they don't see anything outside of their immediate, view. So things like that, that's important. Absolutely. And knowing your own biases, right? How they affect and the effect they have on objectivity, because as I was saying, the truth of the matter is we all have our biases. It's how much does that color our perspectives and maybe how we address things and how we go forward. If you know of your biases and you're conscious of them, you can, be conscious to not let those sneak in too much to kind of overtake and move it in one direction when maybe it should be going in another, right? And then I love the last one here, thinking in reverse, right? I mean, if thinking in the opposite way, like you're approaching it, right? One way, or you're thinking about, like they give the example here, if you think X caused Y, right? Ask yourself, what if Y actually caused X, right? It's that, like, thinking, just reverse it and think, because it could be, anything's possible. And that could help you come up with a solution that might be better. So are there any questions? I'm closer at the end of most of really the slides. I just want to open it up if there are any questions from the audience that have come into the chat box, or if you'd like to just unmute and ask me any, that is totally fine. I don't see any more come in. So if I missed one of yours, either unmute yourself now and you can ask that, or you can just put it in the chat box. That's fine too. Totally up to you. Any other questions from anyone? And please do put in the chat box if you do have any suggestions for other topics, either professional development topics that you'd like. And I'm working on bringing in some external folks. We're going to be doing a great one we're hoping to do a great one on LinkedIn, and how to use LinkedIn beyond the job search for connecting and for affiliate groups and all kinds of different things. So we're going to be doing that. We're looking at some other, storytelling types of things, how storytelling your way through life. There's, and we really are open to and wanting to have some outside, assistance with that too. So if there's any kind of topics that you would like to get better at, I'm happy to consider them and look external if and when we need for somebody to complement what we have and what we can offer. So thank you so much for being here today. And I'll be on if you have any other questions. Thanks so much. Make it a great day.